Welcome to the Restaurant Growth Show podcast, where we talk about how operators can use technology to grow their business. We've got a lot to talk about in this episode, but first, let's introduce our very special guest. As president and CEO of the Partnership Group Sponsorship Specialist, Brent Barootes played a pivotal role in launching brands like Red Lobster Canada and Chi-Chi's Mexican restaurant. With over 3 decades of experience, Brent has reshaped the landscape of sponsorship marketing in Canada. But he's not just a strategist. Brent is also the best-selling author of Reality Check, Straight Talk about sponsorship marketing. Brent, it is a privilege to have you on the show. How are we doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you very much for having me. It's a exciting opportunity to be on your show. Thank you very much for having me.
That's great. I got to tell you, Brent, I recently read your article that you published on LinkedIn about fear of missing out, or FOMO. And I've been experiencing serious FOMO over the last month or so. There's a lot of restaurant technology events going on, like Fast Casual Summit last week. There's the International Pizza Expo in Las Vegas that happened recently, FS Tech, the Digital Restaurant Association Marketing Summit. Tell me, Brent, how should I get over this FOMO that I'm feeling?
I think the tough thing is just coming to the reality that every time you decide to make a change because you need to go to that pizza event in Vegas or whatever, there's something else that's going to fall off your plate. And it comes back to prioritizing what your goals are. And for you guys, with the great product that you're going to launch, it's amazing because that's where your focus needs to be right now, as opposed to those other places that you fear you might miss out on not being there.
I appreciate that. Jose, do you have anything that you're fearing
I
of
read
missing out on?
a lot that I live in fear of missing out. But I think that I found that article quite refreshing, especially the reminder to myself that the focus makes things happen, and it's a practice that I've very consciously I'm taking care of it all day long, because it's with so many notifications, you name it, it's so easy to get off of focus that it is something to take care of.
So, Brent, you mentioned you got your start by looking for alternative revenue channels for nightclub operations in the late 80s, and it somehow led you to work with the Calgary Flames and the Ottawa Senators radio broadcast. Can you tell us what that journey was like?
It was a really interesting journey. I graduated from Western University, Huron College in London, Ontario, and I went right into the restaurant and the hospitality industry, as you indicated, with Chi-Chi's and Red Lobster, and helped launch those chains in Canada and build them up. And then I ended up going to work for private enterprise in Atlantic Canada, in Fredericton. And it was a nightclub operation with a food service operation and a pub and a piano bar all under one roof. So it was a large operation. And the owner came to us one day and said, those darn university students, they're not drinking like they used to. We need to find alternate revenue channels. And so in the nightclub and throughout the building, we need to find alternate revenue channels. And so we did a couple of things. We diversified. We took the nightclub and basically closed it down Monday to Wednesday, because we had other venues within the building to serve booze and food and those sorts of things. And we converted it to trade show space. It was a large space, and so we competed with the hotels and stuff in town. But where the real money we found was to start selling sponsorships, naming hallways, naming drinks, naming bars. The wood, this would no longer be the North Corner wood, it would be ABC Company wood or whatever. And then, this was a fairly large nightclub, but Thursday, Friday, Saturday, there'd be a lineup of 300 or 400 people waiting to get in. So there was sampling like we see in Costco today, but back in the 80s, we were sampling in line, allowing different companies to have their products sampled there. And at the same time, from the DJ booth in the nightclub part, messages, just like you'd hear over the PA system at a sponsor or at a sporting event. So that shifted, and the owner of the nightclub and the restaurant also owned a series of radio stations, and Montreal moved their farm team, the Canadiens farm team, into Fredericton, and this guy's radio station acquired the rights to the broadcast. So I had run, quote unquote, a successful sponsorship program within the nightclub and the bars and the restaurant. So they moved me over to the radio station to help build out the sponsorship packages for the sales reps at the radio station to be out selling. And from there, I ended up moving to work actually selling sponsorships for the Flames radio broadcast in Calgary, and the people that owned those rights also eventually acquired the rights to the Senators. So I went up to launch that broadcast up there and the sponsorship sales at that end. And then back to Calgary with the Flames broadcast. And then in 2001, put out my own shingle for Partnership Group Sponsorship Specialist, trying to fill a void in the marketplace for sponsorship consulting.
Incredible. So over the years, you've obviously seen a great evolution of revenue channels for hospitality along the way. How have you seen the role of technology evolve in this space, in the sponsorship space?
Well, I think probably the biggest things have really erupted on the tech side for sponsorship and in the hospitality, specifically related to the hospitality industry, from COVID forward. So really 2020, March 2020 to today, the acceleration of technology use by the hospitality industry, specifically in the sponsorship sector, has escalated and grown exponentially. A couple of examples you might look at this is a baseball team in Louisville, Kentucky called Louisville Bats, and they used augmented reality to tie in opportunities for sponsorship with one of their key partners, which was a restaurant chain. So in the Louisville area, I think they had like 9 stores, this restaurant chain. And during COVID, as we all know, people weren't dining in, but there was a lot of pickup and takeout. And the baseball team was just at that time getting into augmented reality. So they took their mascot, Batty, and they created a augmented reality piece. And then they partnered with that restaurant group to create almost like a scavenger hunt scenario during COVID, encouraging people to go and order their food from this restaurant group. Because if you like our baseball team and you're a fan, you should be supporting our restaurant partners and this one specifically. And as a result, the program was order from this restaurant chain, go by, take yourself a picture of picking up your food that's being, delivered to your car or your vehicle, and also use the augmented reality version of Batty, the mascot, and include that in your selfie.
Right.
And so it trained the people to use the augmented reality app and the opportunity. It was prizing the people that purchased the most product, most times submitted their picture, and there was free meals given away, free merchandise when baseball came back and they were filling the stadium. There was free tickets, and it allowed that restaurant chain to maintain a strong level of revenue during the COVID period, and they continue to do a scavenger hunt program with augmented reality. The other area that we see a lot of technology-wise in the hospitality sector and sponsorship is utilizing big data that, from a perspective of understanding who your clients are. So, through both, through pieces like technologies that would be used for point of sale and for pick up different types of software, that you can pull the data from a postal code here in Canada and in the States. We can utilize that postal code data to determine exactly who your audience is and how to reach them and how they're spending their disposable income. So we're recently doing some work with a client, an organization, a not-for-profit. It's actually a charity, and it's a health-based charity. And utilizing their database, for instance, We can figure out where people are actually eating out. And for instance, Kelsey's is high on that list. Number 2 to 9 or 2 to 10 are all Restaurant Unlimited brands. So your Montana's and the name the list goes on for Restaurants Unlimited. But by doing that, this organization can now go to Restaurants Unlimited and say, hey, this is the audience. This is how much money that our people that are associated to our walk or our run at our charity, this is how much money they're spending on a weekly basis in your restaurants. Yeah. This is how much, and this is what they're buying. These are the products, and this is how it breaks down across the country. So that type of technology can be reverse engineered from somebody like a Restaurant Unlimited. Who should they be partnering with in a sponsorship? Which are the right organization? And then finally, I mean, just simple things like enter to win contests. If they want to sponsor an event, a walk, a run, a festival, a beer fest, any of those types of things, that restaurant or that food service organization is sponsoring that, they can take technology and build it out, like creating a gaming app for under $5 or $6 grand, which will allow them to gather more data than they could ever imagine about audiences, to be able to then reach those audiences to drive them back to the restaurant itself. So those are some of the technology pieces that we can see from a sponsorship side.
So that is super interesting. And just for our viewers, our audience, which we have restaurants of all sizes, what would be, could you give us an example of a step-by-step that they can do to get all the way to land a sponsorship?
So I think the best way, whether they're an independent, single operator, family-owned and operated business, or they're a large chain, doesn't matter. But it's knowing who your audience is as a food service or as a restaurant operation. Who is your audience? And then align yourself with the same sort of organization. So for example, if you skew heavily to a female audience in your restaurant, then you're probably not going to want to sponsor prostate cancer. It's the wrong audience, right? Or likewise, if you're a hip, trendy restaurant as opposed to, an established old steakhouse, that's been around for 3 generations, that trendy might be that you want to be sponsoring events that are hip and with that type of audience that are attending. Then the next step is, once you've determined that your audience matches with their audience, then the next step is to determine what you want to achieve. And so many organizations fail to do this in sponsorship. They fail to determine, what am I trying to achieve? I just want to see my brand built up. Or I want to see traffic driven to my restaurant, or I want to see traffic driven directly to my own delivery service versus, the Skip or the other products. So in each of those cases, you need to know what it is that you want to achieve by investing in a sponsorship and how you're going to measure success. So if I'm going to sponsor an event and my goal is to drive traffic specifically into my restaurant over the next 3-week period, how am I going to do that? Maybe I'm going to give them bounce back coupons at exiting the event. Maybe I'm going to run an activity in there that I can actually get their email addresses, or I can get their Facebook following, or whatever it is, so that I can send direct messages to them with a direct offer, whether that's a free appetizer, whether that's a discount, whether it's an early bird special, or whatever those offers are. And then know that your goal is to increase over that 3-week period, to increase revenues or customer counts. It depends on what your average check is and where you want to go with that. Maybe it's just your volume you want to increase. Maybe it's average check you want to increase. Maybe it's total sales you want to increase, or all the above. But let's just say it's volume. I want to see an increase on early week traffic up by 12%. Now you can actually see whether that sponsorship investment that you made is actually successful or not. And just because you don't reach the 12% doesn't mean it wasn't successful. You may have to tinker with it the following year, or the next event that you do, to try to fine tune it to get it up to that 12. If your growth is 1%, there's probably you've made some mistakes in there.
Brent, I'm curious, how patient should restaurateurs be with these types of marketing campaigns? Because as we've seen in the past, running a single integrated campaigns that like you're talking about, there's a lot of moving parts there. Should restaurateurs expect an immediate ROI?
No, I think that, and I've been in the marketing business for a very long time and aligning it with the hospitality and the restaurant business. And when I look at that, so often a restaurant will buy a radio campaign or a newspaper campaign or a Facebook campaign or a sponsorship, and they'll look for immediate results. And it just doesn't happen. I always try to remind restaurants that, you know what, if they can have brand recall 30% of the time or a third of the time. So when that group at the office says, hey, let's go out for lunch today, and somebody says, where should we go? That if your restaurant is named 1/3 of the time, every time, you're going to get a third of the business. Mm-hmm. And so it's about building your brand equity and your brand content so that those people at lunch, or when you say to your partner, let's go for dinner, and the first question after that comes out is, where do we want to go? And then you spend the next hour trying to decide where you want to go. But if you can name 3 places and that restaurant is one of those 3, you're going to, on average, get the business a third of the time. Yeah. So it's about building brand recognition and building it over a long term. I remember years and years ago working with a restaurant group. This was free Skip and Uber Eats and all of those sorts of things. It was in Calgary, and it was a company called Waiters en Route. And they were a company that, this would have been in the early 90s. And they were a company that said, hey, you go and call us, and we have menus, because this was pre-internet. We have menus for you from 15 different restaurants on this one strip of restaurants on 17th Avenue. And you call us and you tell us that you want pasta from Chianti, and you want Chinese from Singapore Sam's, and you want this from another place. We'll go pick up all 3 of those and we'll deliver them to your house. And they wanted to run a radio campaign, and they said, we're going to run it for a month, and we're going to run it 5:20 in the afternoon. And they came to talk to me at the radio station, and they said, we're going to run one spot every day, Monday to Friday at 5:20, because that's when people get in their cars to drive home. Mm-hmm. And I said, you're taking your money and you're wasting your money, because nobody makes that decision at 5:20, and not everybody leaves the office at 5:20. And cell phones weren't even that popular at that point in time. It wasn't like you were going to pick up hands-free in your car and be able to order your 3 things from Waiters en Route. I said, you're wasting your money. You're way better to run a 6-month campaign every other week to build brand awareness. You can run it in morning drive, more importantly, because that's when they're making decisions, thinking about what am I going to cook for dinner tonight, and then recall it on the afternoon drive. And they told me I was an idiot, and they went to another radio station. And about 9 months later, they came back and said, you were right. Can you help us? And I said, sure. But, you got to do what I'm telling you to do rather than what you think is right, because you're really good at running Waiters en Route, and I'm really good at building a radio program for you.
Right. I hope they apologized too.
They did. And they became a long-term customer. They lasted about 3 years, and then they did go under, and the internet came in, and people were ordering online, and so.
Yeah, that sounds like the first third-party delivery platform.
Yeah, it was. It was pretty funny. I go back and think about that. So
yeah,
that's a great story.
Great story, yeah. And it's classic, right? It's like, when they come back, you better do what I tell you.
Right? Exactly. Yeah, and it's interesting that you bring that up, Brent, brand recall, because we can't measure brand recall really in my mind. Maybe I'm missing something, but we're in tech, and we value so much of what we do in terms of touch points and analytics and actionable insights. But brand recall is something that is so valuable, but we just can't measure that. I
You-
just really find that interesting.
it is interesting because you can measure it, but it can be expensive. So,
Fair.
for instance, let's say you're doing a sponsorship and you're sponsoring a concert festival in Victoria on the Labor Day weekend, right? And as a restaurant, you sponsor it. What you want to do is, if that concert, it's a music festival, it's on every year. Maybe part of your deal with that sponsorship is that they have to reach out to all of their existing database and say, run a survey, of which one of the survey questions is, which of the following restaurants have you eaten at in the last year, but the idea being that restaurant would be listed in there, and you might use what they call aided recall, that's listing it, or it might be unaided recall. Tell us name 3 restaurants that you like to eat at. And then we would see that before this sponsorship occurs, the brand recall for that restaurant or that restaurant group is only 3% amongst this audience, or 5% or 10%, whatever it turns out to be. Then they activate and they sponsor the event, and then you run the same survey afterwards. And if that number has gone up from 10% to 12%, maybe you didn't do such a great job. Yep. But if it went from 10% to 40%, wow, now you have brand recall, right? And you have the measurement to know that it worked.
Very well said. Yes, absolutely. I think that on a micro level, tough to do. But with these larger restaurant groups, like you said, running these surveys can be actually really effective. That's fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, very good.
Awesome. Well, this has been a lot of fun, Brent, and it's definitely got my wheels turning about how sponsorship marketing and technology can add revenue to restaurants. So thank you for sharing. Brent, now's your time to plug away. How can businesses get a hold of you if they want to explore sponsorship marketing?
Thank you very much. If they want to go to our website, partnershipgroup.ca, or if they want to reach me directly, the best platform on social for me is LinkedIn. Just punch in the name Brent Barootes or Partnership Group and you'll get it. And if you want to reach me directly via email, it's Brent, BRENT, @partnershipgroup.ca.
Wonderful, my friend. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Speaking of sponsorships, this podcast is sponsored by Dynpricing, real-time restaurant profitability. Dynpricing uses AI to improve profitability for restaurants by dynamically updating menus across digital channels. That's all the time we have today for this episode. Until next week, say goodbye, Jose.
Say goodbye.
Brent, thank you so much. This was fantastic. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, guys. All right.